Before I get going, if anyone here has a lot of pull with Delta Airlines, see if they can find my suitcase for me. I really need that. And I'd like it before the 12 o'clock talk that I'm going to do later today. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about is if HR and just all kinds of executives actually talk to employees. And this is a very different topic from what I'm used to doing, because most people know me as an industry analyst, and I'm up on stage all the time talking about artificial intelligence and applicant tracking systems, those kind of things. But I'm a little tired of going to client after client after client, and they want me to do their work for them. They want me to tell them about why they are being surprised all the time. So let's talk about some of the big surprises right now. A lot of executives, just by a show of hands, just start putting them up and leaving them up. How many of your executives were surprised by the Great Resignation? How many are surprised at how difficult it is to attract talent? How many are surprised at how long it takes to fill open positions today? And I could keep going on. There are just tons and tons of these surprises. And when I talk with clients, what I find out is there's a big disconnect sometimes between employees and HR and with the top executives, that no one's really finding out what's the real reason why we are being surprised. Let's get into that. So, well, that's who I am. The other day, I was actually in a grocery store near my house, and I won't tell you why, but I was upstairs looking down and watching shoppers. And I find that it's very interesting to notice how different people are. And when I'm from that vantage point, I could see people coming in the store, and they're from all generations, they're from all kinds of income levels, they're all buying different things. Some have a very defined path that they follow as they go through the store, and others are about as clueless as this one nephew of mine, just constantly just walking around and not knowing what's going on, and kind of is always surprised at everything that he sees along the way. What I'm getting at is that many speakers, probably some at this show, want to talk to you about, well, there's Generation Z, there's Gen X, there's all these generations, and they want to slap one label on tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people. And that's not the right way to look at it, in my opinion. That people are very different. And when, the shopping exercise was clearly a good example of that. So related to that, I went back and looked up an old book that I've had in my office for a decade or more. This guy named Paco Underhill, he spent tens of thousands of hours actually looking at videotape of people buying clothing. And this first book that he did was really impressive in that it was founded on doing a lot of real original primary research. But I've yet to meet the HR organization that gets out of the office and actually observes people. Now think about that for a minute. I mean, how much do you really know about what it is that people do in your company? What do you know about what they feel, what they want? And how would you get to know that? Because a lot of you probably can't get out of the office because you don't have a budget for it. You've got so many pressing deadlines of other things to do. What I find is that we don't know an awful lot about folks. And if you think it's bad in HR, it's worse at the top executive level. They are beyond clueless in a lot of cases. And I'm going to talk about that some more. Can you guys hear me all the way back in the cheap seats? Okay. So what do a lot of companies do? One of the first things they do is they'll want to argue with me like, no, Brian, you got it all wrong. We do an annual survey of our employees. Oh, man. Talk to your employees about that annual survey. They hate it. They lie when they answer questions. They don't trust it. You can tell them all the time that it's strictly confidential, and they know you're lying when you tell them that. So they're not going to tell the truth. So how can you get anything value out of that? The second source is they go, but Brian, we also do exit interviews. Who tells the truth on that? Nobody. Because all these people want to do is just give me my last paycheck and let me get out the door, for God's sakes, okay? They want out of there bad, and they don't tell the truth there. Or you could read a white paper from some software vendor. Anyway, I don't think you're going to get a lot of value out of any of those sources. What we do know is that a lot of the old ways of collecting information on the left here, they've got problems. And the ones on the right, we're not seeing a lot of executives get involved with. I don't see executives doing things like participating in job interviews or new hire interviews with like college or high school graduates and learning what is it that the new generation really wants or aspires to or needs in their career and their life. They're just not doing it. I put rideshare on there not because it's the green thing to do, but because I actually met a chief HR officer recently, and I found out that she was flying all over the world to visit with people at her level and above in the company at all their different locations globally. So I asked her, do you ever find out if there's anyone else on the plane that you work with that you could spend time sitting with them for like 2, 4, 18 hours? Or if you were on my flights yesterday, let's go about 23. But thank you again, Delta Airlines. But what you find out is when you've got a captive audience right there, someone sitting right beside you, they'll tell you about all kinds of things that you wouldn't get out of a survey. And the question is, are you doing enough to encourage more of these informal communication opportunities between your executives and your HR leadership and the rank and file employees? Because if you did, you'd probably learn a lot more about what they want in this world. I'll cover some more of that in a moment. So, if we knew more about what makes people tick, we wouldn't be surprised. And that's the thing that's really got me since the pandemic busted out. Now, I want to tell you, it's been great, the way many of you had to roll up your shirt sleeves and help your companies do a whole bunch of things related to finding staff, opening stores, changing business models and the like. But if we really knew our people, we could really do a great job of cutting down some of the the attrition problems and improve morale and so forth. By the way, that executive I was telling you about, not only did she not want to sit on a plane with somebody and learn about them, she thought that the way she could turn this company's workforce problems around was to change the color of the company logo. I swear to God. I thought I was reading her wrong, but I double-checked with another analyst and found out, no, we all knew she wasn't going to be long for this world. In fact, she's now been at a chief HR officer at 3 different companies in the last 4 years. She's not doing very well. So what's at stake? If we don't do something better to understand employees, we're going to have more attrition, more surprises, and those are going to lead to some of these things that are on this slide. I saw something fascinating the other day that Visier, which is an HR analytics vendor out of the States, did. They shot a 6-minute video. And I'm not here, as an industry analyst, I have no economic interest in any vendor. So this isn't a plug for them. But I did leave their link on here. If you want to, it's worth watching this video. And what I really want you to do is look for 2 things. They gave a whole bunch of new Generation Z employees of some company a little whiteboard. And they asked them different questions. And as they asked questions, people would write it down like it's a game show on television. And then eventually the moderator would ask them to flip their whiteboard over, and they would disclose the answers, and you'd even see interaction between them. Now, the beauty in this is if I'm an executive and I don't know anything about Generation Z people, I could watch this 6-minute video, and I guarantee you, I'm going to be surprised at a lot of those answers. This technique that they used, I thought, was really clever in being able to find fast insights about a whole new demographic or type of worker and making them available to all levels of people in a company. Vizier probably doesn't want me to say this to you, but I love the technique so much, I'm going to recommend all of you steal it and do it for your own firm and do it for a bunch of different demographic groups, because you might be surprised at what each group thinks about things like work from home. And this is great input. There's another problem going on right now called catfishing, and that's when the employees that you think you know turn out to be completely different. There's a television show on the network MTV where they showcase people who have been putting on a fake persona on the internet and tricking people into maybe dating them or whatever virtually. That's been going on a lot actually in recruiting circles, where you think you're dragging somebody along very successfully through the recruiting process only to get burned or surprised at the end and they don't show up. So this problem is going on a lot. The communication, though, is the problem. And I'm going to go back to something I said at the very beginning. My clients want me to somehow come in and tell them all about their workforce because they don't go out and collect that information themselves. And you know why I won't do it? It's not because I don't want the fees. It's because they need to hear it themselves. They need to internalize that. They need to experience that interaction on a personal basis if it's ever going to sink in. And if you're from HR and you're in this audience, don't you run out and go do that work for them. Instead, you need to do things to make them interact with these different generations of people. There's an article in this month's Harvard Business Review. It's called Why Your Mentoring Program Should Be Mandatory. The one thing they didn't talk about in that otherwise excellent article, and it really is a good one, is that the reason you want your execs all talking to their subordinates is so that they learn from each other about what really matters. And let me put a very fine point on this. So this weekend, I was talking to an accounting manager who also happens to be the hiring manager for the accounting department at this big multinational. And she's expressing to me how frustrated she is because they've been looking for another accounting manager for 7 months and have not been able to fill that position. Does this story kind of resonate with some of you guys? So I ask why. And she says, well, it boils down to one word on the job listing, and that's flex work. That they could choose to, that they have the ability to work sometimes in the office and sometimes at home. And I go, and people don't want that. She goes, no. In fact, the only people that are responding to those ads want it to be 100% virtual. I go, well, have you explained this to HR and to your CFO? And she goes, oh, yeah. But they don't listen. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been hearing this "they don't listen" comment coming again and again and again. And I'm not trying to flog a dead horse here, but I get a ton of excuses from executives why they don't want to get involved. You can see them here. You know, it takes time. I don't have the time. You know, why aren't people just doing what I tell them to do? I don't need to be their babysitter. I mean, I've heard all these stories. None of them really are true. And they don't want to do anything different. So, how does this happen? And I think a lot of what's going on, there's a big disconnect in companies where the people at the top think that other people in the company and other generations, other levels are just like them. That's the first mistake. They're not. And I'll be the first to admit it. In fact, I'm glad that most folks don't act and behave a lot like me. So that's a blessing, I think. But what also is happening is, these companies are using survey data And oftentimes it gets all averaged up to the point of being virtually meaningless. If you're a large company, you have thousands of employees, and you look at this stuff on an average basis, it doesn't do anything for you. The truth, I would argue, I've already talked about some of these points, but the last one there, you have to do the primary research. You have to do that. You can't outsource that, in my opinion, to somebody else. If you do, it's a good starting point, but it's not a replacement for you doing the work yourselves. Because what you'll find out, like one of my clients has a remote operation in a very distant remote part of Australia. And trust me, when I tell you that they have to be very careful and attuned to what people need, because you just can't find laboratory workers in the middle of the desert, okay? They just don't, they're not growing on trees out there. Now, I grew up in a large family, and we loved to play cards. Most of us did. And what was interesting about card players is they're really good at learning how to read a person. And if you tried to play cards with my family, what you quickly learned is that the different people there, some were table talkers, some were cheats, some trash talked, some counted cards, some of them reneged on things or cheated otherwise, you know. And the worst part was watching my kids look at their grandfather and realize he's a scoundrel. And I go, yeah, well, you know, that's what you get when you finally learn this. What I'm getting at is you've got people in your company who might be strong on the IQ side of things, the intellectual quotient, and not so good on the EQ, the emotional quotient perspective. I have a brother-in-law. Oh boy, he's a trained engineer. He is absolutely brilliant on complex problems. But trust me, you wouldn't invite him to anybody's wedding because he is terrible in social situations. He has no IQ. And the best listeners are the ones who might surprise you. They may not be the highest paid person in your company, but they've got an ear for picking up on little subtle signs of what's actually bothering or troubling individuals. But this goes back to, I'll guarantee you, somebody who's good at playing cards is really good at reading people. And if they can read people in a card game, they could read them in your firm too. One of the most incredible engagements I got to do was a few years ago, was travel around the planet with an industrial psychologist. And we helped the chief operating officer of this large manufacturer figure out basically who in his far-flung empire was lying to him. How about that? Now, I don't have an education in that. I'm a business guy and technology guy, but man, I can read them. And it was a fascinating gig. You know, your managers are people that you need to make sure they're actually listening to what your employees are saying, not just the HR managers, all the operational ones. And sometimes what that requires is a hard decision to make about, I don't think someone should be in a managerial position because they are so bad at reading what's going on in their team. They might technically know what they're doing, but they're going to run off that team in time anyway. And so you have to decide, is this a toxicity kind of problem you're going to deal with? So in the last couple of minutes here, all I want to close with is tell you that some of these people out there in this world, they can really do this and do this well. Some just don't have the empathy to do it. And I'm not 100% convinced that we can train people to be more empathetic. You might be able to get a little bit better understanding, but what you can do is you can control some situations that make them interact with other people, and then they have to talk about it and share those observations with others. You could do some very simple things. One, make the mentoring mandatory. Make them have responsibilities for meeting and mixing with people of all different levels in the company. Number two, make them go to lunch with other people. And that's going to be really hard to do if everyone's working from home. And that's your to-do, is to figure out a new way that you can trigger this kind of accidental or infrequent connections with people across levels in the company so that you can learn from each other about it. I can go on. You guys can see these slides. Watch out for the top executives, though. Even in your own company, I don't care how great they are and how much they talk about how they're trying to build a great organization. If you don't get the suits involved, and they are going to give you 100 reasons why they don't want to be involved, you've got to get them involved into this capability. And you need to make it part of their metrics. Because if you don't make it part of how they get paid and compensated, they're never going to change. So I'm going to skip that little case study, and I'll just tell you this. You can fix some things, but before you run out today and go look at buying new tools, new technology, new surveys, whatever, really take a moment and think for yourself, what are we doing as an organization to really understand and listen to our people, really listen to what they're saying? And if we do that, are we, what are we going to learn from that, and how do we manage through that? Anyway, the last thing I'd just tell you is make sure you have a plan for what you're going to do with those who don't want to listen, because you will encounter them. So with that, sorry I went a minute over, but thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your time. And I'm glad to see there are more people here now than when I started, so thank you again.